Well, thank you, everyone, for having us. And in case it needs to be clarified, I'm Cristina Mittermeier.
I'm Paul Nicklen.
And we flew in from Canada yesterday. It's a long, long flight, and we were very excited.
We're a little flat and a little blue tonight. For the Canadians who understand that Edmonton Oilers lost the Stanley Cup last night to Florida, so it hit us hard. But we're going to push through. Go Panthers.
Yes,
All
go
right.
Panthers. They earned it.
Congratulations.
Yes. Anyway, we're here with you for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, tell you a few stories, show you a few pictures. And before we tell you what we do and why we do it, we're going to show you how we do it.
Thank you. All right, everybody's relaxed and in the mood. Before we start our 25-minute presentation, we have to have a quick disclaimer, and that is that we know Katie Couric is one of the great unbiased journalists of this century, but we know her well, and we know John extremely well. I sort of said for a joke one day, hey, do you guys ever want to come on our boat? And they said, we'd love to. So when they agreed to come into little airport of Laredo, Mexico, we sent a van. We thought we were going to be bringing in their entourage and their security detail, and we brought another bus for all their luggage. We quietly parked all those vehicles, and Katie and John got off with one little rollerboard, and it was just the two of them. And they got on board our boat and turned out to be the coolest guests we've ever had. Where was that?
The best.
The best. And John did most of the driving of the boat, some of the drone flying, and Katie made most of the meals, and we laughed and we talked about conservation. So it's going to be a real privilege tonight to share the stage.
Come back anytime.
You guys are the only guests that we're welcoming back anytime. So just to get us a bit of history and a bit of context, my story began when I was my journey really as a photographer, as a journalist who specializes in the most inhospitable and coldest parts of the planet, began when I was 4 years old, when my family moved from southern Saskatchewan all the way up to Baffin Island, where we lived in an Inuit community of 190 Inuit people. We never had a radio, we never had television, we never even had a telephone. You would phone out once a year. Our groceries got delivered to the shores of this community once a year. But what it really taught me was two things: how to be tough, how to freeze, how to survive in such a cold environment, and also develop the right creative part of my brain by learning from the Inuit with their visual storytelling through the soapstone carving and lithograph paintings. And I don't know what your family camping trips look like, but this is us camping on a beautiful spring day. It's minus 30. We're out on the sea ice. Those huskies at the bottom of the frame are the early warning system for polar bears when they come into camp. But I knew I was going to do something someday that had to do with protecting the Arctic. And the obvious job seemed to go off and become a scientist, to work as a biologist working on species like polar bears. Here my friend Mitch is trying to dart it. I've been assigned to the bitey end of the bear to distract it while he tried to give it a hand injection. And I learned very quickly that we were failing with science. Science was important, but it was often overridden by politics. And so I just thought, if I could just get a job with a little-known magazine like National Geographic, then I could spend the rest of my life translating what the scientists are telling us. And I knew that I would spend the rest of my life giving a face and a voice to the species that are being most threatened by changing polar regions, both the Arctic and Antarctica. But it was an amazing adventure to spend 3 years, for example, living on the sea ice every summer for 3 months at a time, just to have one good day of photographing narwhals. I crashed 2 airplanes in this journey. I dislocated my shoulder on this day and had to be sent out of the project. But as they were trying to reset my shoulder and I was wincing in pain, all I could do was remember all of the tusks and the ivory and the narwhals that we were able to photograph that ended up making it into National Geographic magazine. And we actually changed the laws on the export of ivory from the Canadian North with that story. And thank you very much. So this is me in my office. This is where I get to go to work. And the only skill that I have that really separates me from all my peers, that makes me better than most of my friends, is that I'm really good at being frozen and miserable. It's really the only skill that I have. Over to you.
Well, meanwhile, I grew up in Mexico City, and I come from a middle-class family. My parents were professionals. My dad was an accountant. My mom's a psychologist. And we didn't have camping trips at all. So I had these dreams of seeing animals. You would read these books, and my imagination would run wild. So I would beg my mom, please take me out to see animals. So here I am with all my siblings in Lake Xochimilco, which is the most polluted lake probably in the world. But in my wild childhood imagination, there were manatees and dolphins in this lake. And so I went on to get a career in science as well. I became a biochemical engineer in northern Mexico, and I spent 4 years looking at the ocean through a microscope and starting to understand just the incredible power that the ocean has to keep us alive. But I had hope that in this university I was going to see whales or dolphins, and we never saw any. I really, for very selfish reasons, became a photographer just for the opportunity to spend time in nature with animals like this. This is a rain wolf. It only lives in the coast of British Columbia, just north of where we live. It's a distinct species from the timber wolf, and as special as it is, it's not protected. I love spending time with animals because they don't have an agenda. And when you grow up with the mean girls in high school, you just want to be with beautiful things that do not judge you back. But as I was learning to make pictures of animals, I was also learning that taking pictures of wildlife can be really hard. Because even though animals don't always want to have their picture taken, it's our job to photograph them in ways that make even the smallest of animals look majestic and important, because they are. All the species on planet Earth are the foundation that allows life to exist here. But what I really wanted to do was to be an underwater photographer. I wanted to take my passion back into the ocean. And this is dangerous, and it's expensive, and it takes a lot of equipment. So how do you do it? Don't worry, the cameras were fine. Of course not. But just to have an opportunity to take a photograph like this. This is a leatherback sea turtle. And we photographed it off the coast of Portugal in the Azores. The water was freezing. And I thought surely she was going to swim away when we got in the water. But she didn't. She just stayed there. As I swam around, I could see that she had a little tag on her fin that told me that she was born in West Palm Beach, Florida. And where we had found her 4,000 miles from where she was born. And, when I'm thinking about these animals, I'm wondering, how does she know one day to make a U-turn and, following a map that only she can see in her head, head back to the same beach where she was born, and for a few hours go on land and lay her eggs? We know nothing about the planet we live on. And if we just recognize that animals are other nations, we might stand a better chance of saving this planet.
Nice.
Thank you.
all of the work we do, and we're going to talk more about the conservation work we do with Katie, but we want to just give you an introduction. But all of the work that we do is at the intersection of art, science, and conservation. It needs to be a beautiful, powerful, evocative image that you can hang on your wall that can live there forever. It needs to be able to talk about the conservation issues, but it needs to be based on science, in fact, if you are going to have that honest conservation. So I was sitting in Svalbard. It was a very bad ice year. I'd been there for 25 days. There was a blizzard going on outside, just a big whiteout, and I'm just waiting for the weather to get better. And I looked up in this window, and we're in this cabin that's half the size of the stage. It's 6 feet by 8 feet. And I look up in the window, and just a few inches from my face is this polar bear's face. So I did what you would do. I opened up the window, and I greeted her. And then I realized very quickly that she could fit through this window, and she kind of wanted to come into this little cabin, which there was no space for her. And so I had to entertain her. And then I realized that this was a very important storytelling moment. Because of the whiteout, her face was fully in shadow, so I thought, how do I get some light on her? So I lit that lamp, which I don't think had been lit since Amundsen had come through there. I just kept her busy. I kept talking to her, kept sort of not letting her in the cabin. Went to go out the back door to get my flashes on the sled, and she met me at the door. I couldn't get those. So the only thing I had was on my sleeping bag on the floor was my laptop. And I opened it quickly to a blank white page, and I held it up about a foot from her face, and I was just able to fill in the shadows on her face and make that image, which is a really important image, because anytime bears come into conflict with humans, they're called problem bears, and you're allowed to kill them, and they don't even come off the hunting quota in Canada. So it's a big issue, and it's a really important image. We ended up making it into National Geographic. This image is called Ice Waterfall, and we have Erica here tonight who with Hilton Contemporary Gallery, and she has some of her art collectors here tonight. It was great to see you all again, and this is one of my most popular...
She represents us.
Yeah, she represents us. So this is one of my most popular fine art images, but it's also a hard storytelling moment, which really makes me happy that this lives on so many walls. It was the opening double-page truck to the National Geographic climate change issue, and in fact, it's pretty cool when a band like Pearl Jam calls me and says, hey, we're doing an album called Gigaton, which is the measurement used for the amount of sea ice and glacier ice and ice shelf ice disappearing from the polar regions, because the number is so big, but we want to put that image on the cover of our album. So it's great that that starts to get us out of our echo chamber and speak to a different audience.
And I just want to quickly acknowledge that Paul grew up with the Inuit people in northern Canada. I grew up very close to indigenous communities in Mexico. And a long time in my career, I spent photographing indigenous people all over the world. I'm not going to talk a lot about it tonight, but just to say that they are the stewards of most of the biodiversity that's left on planet Earth. And they are the last people on this planet that still are connected to the operating system on planet Earth. And if we want to heal our planet and regain balance, we better start listening to what they're saying.
Yes. So, although we're scientists, both of us, we're not going to get into science and data here with pictures, because they often don't create that emotional connection. But this is the most important data slide that I can show you. This is 800,000 years of data collected. I was in Antarctica photographing them, pulling out all the ice cores. So they're looking at carbon over 800,000 years. And you look at the natural cycle. Every 300,000 years there's a rise in the temperature, there's a decline in the temperature. And then you get into the last 300 years of time here, and that line goes off the chart like a hockey stick. And that's not going to change until we change our ways. So this is an incredibly important slide to remember. For me, somebody as a biologist, I saw 3,000 polar bears in my lifetime, and I had never seen a dead polar bear until recently, and now we're starting to find dead polar bears. And when you talk to scientists and they say that polar bears are going to be extinct in the next 100 years, I want people to know that it's not just data points falling off a sheet of paper. These are charismatic, beautiful animals that are out there that need sea ice in order to survive. I'm not going to show you this whole video because it's too depressing, but this is a starving polar bear video that we released several years ago, and it shocked the world. It's very, very hard to watch. But we did not want that bear to die in vain. He probably only lasted a couple more days. We told its story, released it to the world. That video got over 2 billion impressions, so a quarter of the planet apparently saw it. It's the most viral video in the history of National Geographic. It was Christina's photo of this situation was Time Magazine's top 10 images of the year, and over 300 major news networks put that out there. But we do this type of storytelling because we want to have a microphone. We want to talk about the issues. It's fine to take a good photograph. Nothing tastes better than a conservation win. And we just had our most recent win. Why don't you just mention it?
Yes, we just came back from the Dominican Republic, where we were working with the government, creating a local campaign to expand the protections on the silverbanks, which has been a sanctuary for humpbacks for a long time, but which was not protected against fishermen. And it's a brand new expansion to protected areas.
And our nonprofit, Sea Legacy, was asked to come up to Norway. In fact, we did a big feature story for National Geographic magazine about orca behavior, but then we were called back a couple of years later to actually help create an MPA to help keep oil drilling and seismic exploration out of this key little area in the Lofoten region to protect the orcas in this time of year when they need to feed. And we use spirit bears. We often use really beautiful, charismatic megafauna to drag people into the conversation. So, of course, we all love Star Wars and Ewoks. This just happens to be a black bear that carries a rare recessive gene that makes it pure white. Made it onto the cover of National Geographic magazine. Cristina flew in with ABC News, NBC News, a team of photographers between that and National Geographic, and mostly working with our partners, led by the First Nations, we were able to protect this entire area from ship traffic. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Majesty surfacing, a large grizzly bear that was when the Supreme Court judge in the Yukon talked about how we need to protect the Peel watershed from gold mining. He held up our article in National Geographic. Cristina talked about the seawolves. Well, in fact, we were able to get some donors to help us buy, for $1 million, we bought working with a bunch of organizations, we bought a whole hunting tenure. So now if a sport hunter wants to come and kill a wolf,
they have to call us.
They have to phone us for their license. And of course, you know what the answer is. We just helped protect 160,000 square kilometers in between South Sandwich Islands and South Georgia from the krill fishing industry. And we did the same in the Ross Sea. And, you know, the penguins were obviously super excited about the win. But sometimes we do what we do because we just want to hang out with animals. And when I was in Antarctica doing a big story on leopard seals, I met this 1,000-pound female seal who decided that I was absolutely useless. I was going to starve to death. And for 4 days straight, she tried to force feed me penguins. Here she's first she started to give me live penguins, then she started to bring me dead penguins. And then at some point, she just sat there and stared at me with a dejected look on her face that I was an absolutely useless animal who was going to starve to death in her ocean.
So yeah, we don't want to lie to you. We do have the best jobs in the world. And we get to spend most of our time, I think, in the most majestic ecosystem on planet Earth. So where's the hope in all of this? A couple of years ago, I was reading a scientific paper written by some of our favorite scientists, and they actually were describing a way that we can restore the health and abundance to the ocean in a single generation. And what they were saying is that we need to focus our efforts on what they call recovery wedges. And those are 6. We don't have a choice. We have to do them all, and we have to do them at the same time. We need more marine protected areas. Those are the national parks of the ocean. We need to protect more species, like sea turtles and whales. We need to stop the flow of pollution into the ocean. And it's not just fertilizers and sediments. It's plastics. It's all the stuff that we throw in. We need to rethink how we extract our protein from the sea. Industrial fishing, the way that we've been doing it for the last 100 years, is no longer viable. We cannot go out into the ocean and industrially hunt wildlife. We also have to restore the habitats that have been destroyed, like coral reefs and mangroves. Finally, my favorite is we have to stop thinking about the ocean as a victim. It's not. It's a huge part of the solution to climate. And we added a 7th wedge, and that is we have to do all of this in a framework of equity and justice for coastal communities. And so why? Why do this work at all? Well, the ocean is the largest and the most important ecosystem on planet Earth. Over 71%. If a spaceship came from another galaxy, they would see our little bubble, and they would say, oh, there's an ocean planet, and these are ocean creatures. We're very arrogant terrestrial animals, and so we don't recognize this. But when you go to the beach and you get tumbled by a wave and you have a big gulp of water, you're not just swallowing water. You're swallowing a rich broth of billions of microorganisms, little algae, little larvae. Those are the plankton that produce 50% of the oxygen that our planet needs. And when they grow up, they look sometimes like creatures like this. And even the bigger animals, we're just learning the role that wildlife plays in the carbon cycle. When we talk about carbon, we just think about chimneys and we think about cars. But animals, of course, everything is made out of carbon. When a big whale like this goes down deep into the ocean, maybe a mile, and it feeds on rich krill or plankton down there, well, when it comes back up to the surface, it poops. And that poop is fertilizer for more plankton. So it's like a gardening. And of course, things are not well. Like Paul said, the Arctic and the Antarctic are warming 4 times faster than anywhere else. In Antarctica, we used to see snow. Now we see rain. And we just came back from Australia. You want to tell people what we saw?
Yeah, we were just asked to come and film in the Great Barrier Reef. We heard there was a bleaching event. It was a 90% bleaching event.
90%.
It was the 4th mass bleaching event in recorded history. The first one was in 1980. We just hit our 4th, and it was by far the worst. They're expecting 50% of the Great Barrier Reef, the largest coral reef ecosystem in the world, to be dead in the next year.
So just to put this in context, coral bleaching had never even been recorded when we were in university, and now it's happening every year. When I say 90% of the largest coral reef ecosystem on planet Earth, you can see it from space. And the news barely blinks, So I want to say thank you, Katie, for allowing us to publish this in your newsletter, because the world needs to know. So our job is to make beautiful photographs to keep the ocean front and center in every conversation, to put it in the news at every chance we have. And when people ask us, what can I do today? Well, let me tell you, the biggest problem that the ocean has is apathy, really. Have you ever heard of the Sustainable Development Goals? Of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, number 14, the one that deals with the ocean, is the most underfunded. Americans, we, are the most philanthropic people on planet Earth. Collectively, we donate over $480 billion a year to charity. But where that money goes is really telling. So some of it goes to religion, some of it goes to health, education, arts. All of these are incredibly important things. But when you see how much goes to the environment, you start realizing that the foundation of life on Earth doesn't have the funding it needs. And only a tiny drop of that goes into the ocean. So I say to people, of course, keep donating to all of the things you care about. But if we want to live on this planet for the future, let's also look at our portfolio of charity. And in the next 10 years, let's just overbuy it for the environment. I don't care which organization, just give handsomely to organizations out there. Because in the 30 years that I've been doing this, and there's no reason for this photo to be up there except to get your attention, I've learned one thing, or we've learned one thing. Everybody thinks that somebody else is going to do something about it.
Cristina just became Canadian.
I'm very proud. But nature is our biggest ally. We were listening to presentations today, and everybody's talking about these incredible technologies, all the ROI, the investments, the cool toys that people are building. All of it is great. This planet doesn't have a better ally than nature to help us tackle the climate crisis. And we need to keep it alive. So now that I'm Canadian, I came up with an acronym. I call it SELFIE. And it stands for someone else is likely fixing it, eh? And it's just to remind us, nobody else is coming to save us. We're going to have to save ourselves. It's going to take all of us